Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the matrix. We have spent a lot of time on politics, and rightfully so. The presidential election in the United States is one of the greatest insults to the American people. This election is provoking the same divide and conquer tactics as always, but it's become more and more aggressive. The racial division, the gender division, the age division, the culture division, the class division, the academic division, everything has become more magnified in this election. Let's discuss a few things first. One thing that we have to understand about politics is optical illusions manipulate perception. Is Kamala Harris a changed candidate? Well, based on the perception, many would assume she is. Is Donald Trump a radical loose cannon who could potentially become a dictator? Based on the perception, many would assume he would be. But what are the facts that everyone can point to that determines the credibility of both candidates for the President of the United States? It is a fact that Kamala Harris is not officially the Democratic nominee for president. This is a fact because she never participated in a primary. Therefore, her nomination is from the Democratic Party itself, not, I repeat, not the American people who select the nominee after their performances in those primary debates. And you see, this is the major problem in this presidential election. Think about this for a moment, because it undermines the election rules. It prevents other Democrats from challenging her for that nomination. And ultimately, it undermines the voice of the American people. That, my friends, is a threat to democracy. I want to refer back to what Old Joe's campaign staff claimed about this coup. They claimed that since Old Joe was not officially the Democratic nominee at the time, there was not a violation in switching him out, and Kamala Harris replacing him as the nominee. But this is an oxymoron, because how can she replace him as the nominee if he wasn't the nominee to begin with? And then there's more. If Old Joe wasn't the official nominee, then how can he participate in a presidential debate? If he's not the Democrats' official presidential candidate, to literally have a presidential debate, and if he isn't the official nominee, then this means there should have been another primary to allow Democratic candidates the opportunity to debate for that nomination. But of course, this never happened because Democrats do not believe in democracy. Donna Brazile exposed that the Democratic National Convention was rigged in Hillary Clinton's favor. She wrote a book about it and has tiptoed to the center after being questioned about this issue by Megyn Kelly. Okay, that's one example of undermining democracy. Then, Old Joe was given an ultimatum by LaTosha Brown, where she would guarantee a huge turnout of black voters if he chose a black woman as his vice president. Okay, that's another example of undermining democracy. It was actually a smokescreen for the election fraud, to be honest, but anywho. Old Joe is the president, and then he sweeps through the primaries with no resistance from other Democratic candidates. So, you're telling me the American voters didn't think that there were more qualified, more exciting, younger, and inspiring Democratic nominees? Bullshit. So even in the primaries in this election cycle, Democrats once again undermined democracy, similar to what happened with Hillary Clinton. Old Joe falls on his face in the presidential debate against Trump, which he wasn't the official nominee, again undermining democracy, then nominates Kamala Harris as the nominee, and somehow she skips the entire process and is awarded the nomination even before the Democratic National Convention, when this official nomination would take place. Mining the democracy of elections. And just on a side note, the Biden administration covered up the scandal of goddamn crack cocaine found in the West Wing of the White House. I mean, that is one of the biggest cover-ups and scandals since Bill Clinton's sexual adventures in the Oval Office. And the reason they covered it up is because Powder Nose was either the culprit or was associated with the culprit who left the cocaine in the building. And that is also related to his dealings with Burisma, who was investigated for money laundering and other financial crimes. Old Joe was also linked to those foreign crimes as well, which was of course covered up. Now, if we look at the Republican Party, do you have this undermining? Negative. Donald Trump essentially is the figurehead of the party. Most Republicans concede that, others challenged him, but collectively, the Republican Party has their candidate, who was chosen by the voters, supported by fellow Republicans, and officially nominated in the Republican National Convention. If we go based off this alone, which presidential candidate is trustworthy? I think it's a no-brainer. Yet the reality has Kamala Harris in the position to become the first woman to become president, the first woman of color to become president, and Donald Trump still putting up a fight for another term. Now here's the problem with Kamala Harris's campaign, including her irresponsible decisions. First, you appear on Stephen Colbert's show and drinks beer. Okay, that's one bad decision because it justified the assumption that Harris has a bit of a drinking problem. Then, if that wasn't bad enough, she does it again in having drinks with Kathy Bates. Gretchen Whitmer is a lunatic, yet she governs the state of Michigan pretty well, and she is popular on social media. Now, the difference between Whitmer and Harris is Whitmer can pull outrageous stunts like this because outside of the wacky antics she displays on social media, she goes back to her state and does her job. Harris, on the other hand, is the current vice president, is running for president of the United States, and is drinking beer as if she has no concern for her image to the American people. Examining her facial expression and demeanor, it's like a freshman in college being peer pressured into having her first beer at a bar. In other words, Harris is a deer caught in the headlights of a wacky governor. She almost appears to be in a position of ignorance, obtaining political advice from Whitmer, and we can say that's exactly what's happening. But this indicates that Harris hasn't been listening. She hasn't been taking her vice presidency seriously, and has simply floated throughout her political career. So she makes bad decisions because she doesn't truly grasp how important optics are in politics. Harris does not realize that frequently seen drinking alcohol indicates that many come to the conclusion she isn't sober most of the time. I mean, people see her as a drunkard at this point, and it's evident in how she struggles to articulate her message in interviews and even rallies. Whitmer doesn't care about Harris. She does this for social media popularity. And I also think Democrats are stabbing Harris in the back by making her look like a complete drunken fool to the American people. Whitmer can drink beer, get up and dance, and prance around. The video goes viral, and even though she may receive some negative backlash, she governs a swing state which she has to abide by the diversity of political ideals. Her liberation as a Democrat is far different than Gavin Newsom or Tina Kotek, two of the most destructive Democratic governors in the country. Newsom governs California, which is a dumpster fire, and Kotek governs Oregon, which legalized goddamn crack cocaine and other hard drugs for recreational use. Whitmer would never do such a thing because she actually respects the accountability of being a governor of the state and its residents. Harris doesn't have any experience governing, no experience as a mayor, and has been thrown into a position of a vice president. Yet, she could have taken that seriously, you know? She is not a serious person and does not understand that drinking alcohol during a presidential campaign is how you lose an election, because it shows the American people you are out of touch. She shouldn't be in this position, so I guess it's all a fun experience for her, I guess.
Now, I would like to say first off, I enjoy a cold one after a hard day's work. It's an American pastime, no doubt about it. Hard-working Americans do like to see politicians loosen up a bit, you know. Take the coat off, hang it on the coat rack, and pull up at the bar for nice time. I get it, we all get it. But Harris hasn't accomplished anything to warrant such relaxation. That crazy witch from Michigan ain't worried about her image, and I do think she is in fact sabotaging Harris's presidential campaign. But Kamala Harris is too dumb to see it. Sorry, it's the truth. Whitmer is indirectly showing the contrast between her and Harris in saying she would have been a better nominee as she's more popular. She's a better politician and can challenge Trump. Oh, let's go have a beer, my friend. Let's show the country you're a down-the-earth person who they can relate to. Yes, Slick Witch knows how to reel the dummy into a political trap. She is a part of an administration that has made life hard for the 99% inflation has single-handedly ruined many lives. Gas prices make it hard for us common folk to maintain our commute budgets back and forth to work. Grocery prices have been out of this world. A gallon of milk, a dozen eggs. Are you friggin' kidding me? Heck, might as well steal a few cows and chickens at this point. I kid. Then you have illegal immigration that has also caused a huge economic strain on local and state government programs. This is for the American people, and Harris, along with Sleepy Joe, just dumped illegal immigrants into communities who sucked all of the government benefits away from citizens. And if that ain't bad enough, they even put illegal immigrants on the United States Census. What in the cowbell are they doing? This administration has committed treason against the United States. We have to keep this in mind. I'm a veteran, and although I'm doing quite all right, there are other veterans who have been ignored, who are suffering with mental illnesses, drug addictions, homelessness. And here you have two boneheads dumping millions of taxpayers' money to illegal immigrants, even housing them. Oh, and there's more, of course. These same illegal immigrants have been allowed to vote also. How in the Sam Hill do you allow illegal immigrants to vote? I mean, this is a madhouse. Kamala Harris, along with Sleepy Joe, have destroyed the country in 4 years. Then she just staggers around chugging beers while the American people are suffering. Then have the nerve to ask them to vote for her as president? Ain't no American with half a brain gonna do such a thing. It's not about Harris being a woman, nor being a woman of color. It's her decisions, it's her role as vice president. It's her lack of concern for the very American people she is trying to manipulate to vote for her. Trump is out there fighting, stomping around, determined, showing the American people he is serious about the country and serious about making their lives better. So it ain't even a close election this time around. Like my colleague mentioned, I guess Harris getting wasted during her presidential campaign is basically saying it's over. Go ahead then, cheers, get as drunk as you can possibly get. I approve this message.
Yeah, Harris chugging beers while the American people have been suffering due to her administration's policies is dismissive, arrogant, and shows she doesn't actually care about the people nor the country. Gretchen Whitmer only uses Harris for her own narcissistic ploys. She doesn't think she's all that smart. She knows Harris isn't politically smart or intuitive. Whitmer wanted Harris to look like a blissfully ignorant puppet. It's a bit sad when you think about it. Democrats used old Joe, and now they're using Kamala Harris. And both have been humiliated in front of the American people. And the main culprits of this covert operation are the progressives in the party, specifically the progressives in Congress. They have taken over the Democratic Party, even making Pelosi and Schumer bend to their will. So Kamala Harris is definitely being drug around like an ideological ragdoll. I mean, look at the decisions Harris has made since becoming the Democratic presidential candidate. She ditched the congressional speech from Netanyahu, which showed that she doesn't stand with the allies of the United States. While that congressional speech was going on, there were Congress members protesting the speech, and there were protesters outside the Capitol as well. Old Joe, nor Kamala Harris failed to show leadership, as Old Joe was sleeping somewhere on vacation, and Harris attended a sorority event. Then she takes a tour around the country, in which she makes appearances on talk shows, blabbering the same old anti-Trump rhetoric, has interviews that were just as disastrous as Old Joe in the presidential debate, as her campaign staff just abandoned her. Or she could have told them to fuck off, I'll deal with it. Well, we see what that got her, right? Goes on the Stephen Colbert show and just makes herself look like a drunkard drinking beer on national television. Colbert was fully aware of the speculation that she was a wino, and he manipulated Harris into thinking, oh, this is for the blue-collar workers out there. Show them you're truly from the middle class. When in reality, he just wanted to boost his ratings. He didn't care that it would hurt her image, even more than it was already. Mind you, this is during her presidential campaign. Goes on a podcast with 2 former NBA players, and states marijuana should be decriminalized and basically legalized across the board. Harris proposed to provide gender reassignment surgery for illegal immigrants who were criminals who were already imprisoned. Again, this is during her presidential campaign. Skips the Al Smith dinner, which is a tradition carried out by presidential candidates every election year. Harris then goes to a bar, and once again is drinking beer with the whack job Kathy Bates during her presidential campaign. Now, all of this, do you think this person truly takes her presidential campaign seriously? Of course not. And if she isn't taking her presidential campaign seriously, then she also isn't taking the issues the American people face seriously neither. Harris wants to legalize marijuana. She even stated prostitution should be legalized, supports penalizing Catholic hospitals for rejecting abortion services, supports gender-affirming care, gender reassignment surgery, hasn't called for a ban of pornographic novels distributed to minors in school libraries, wanted to defund the police, advocates for mass immigration, including illegal immigrants, basically called the ICE agency white supremacists, wanted to ban fracking, pushing for an electric vehicle mandate on the auto manufacturers, raise taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations, which will hurt the working class directly, wants to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour nationwide, again, will hurt the working class directly, proposes free college, proposes free health care, proposes $25,000 in federal grants for first-time home buyers, proposes up to $50,000 in tax deductions for small business owners, proposes to give greater access to the cannabis industry for black men, advocates for more abortions. I mean, who the hell would vote for such a radical candidate? If you envision such an administration, the country would become a third world savage land within 10 years. Heck, perhaps within a few years. Now, if you look at her opponent and what activity he has been involved in, well, he went to McDonald's to show Harris up. He has been interviewed by many podcasters, including the most popular one in Joe Rogan's podcast, And he recently drove around as a garbage man, taking a shot at old Joe for his comments recently. The American people have already chosen their president. And this is why the Obamas are going into panic mode, flinging insults all over the place. At demographics, they know will not be voting for Harris. But she could have distanced herself standing as a strong candidate, but she can't actually propose anything genuine because she's not in control of her own damn campaign and policies. How about proposing an increase in unemployment benefits, as many are suffering with reduced hours due to company cutbacks? How about just proposing a, get this, American Rescue Plan, where her administration will distribute at least $500 to $1,000 checks to the American people, helping them recover from the economic crisis of the previous administration's boneheaded spending.
But Kamala Harris is plugged into the machine, you know. She could never propose anything beneficial to black men, nor the rest of the country. Because it brings actual genuine policy talks to the table, which goes against what the progressives and most Democrats stand for. The party is full of socialists, communists, Marxists, just radical anti-American psychopaths trying to destroy the country from within. The enemy from within, right? They want more government control, more government dependence. They do not care about the average working class citizens. And if you think we are making things up regarding Democrats abandoning Kamala Harris, well, look no further than one of those wacky progressive Congress members. That would be wacko Rashida Tlaib. Yeah, a crazy imbecile spewing garbage on the congressional floor. Quote, Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib declines to endorse Kamala Harris. Oh wow, really? What happened to women empowerment? What happened to supporting a fellow woman of color? What happened to supporting a fellow Democrat, who is a woman, and who is also a woman of color just like you? What's going on here? Why has she backed down all of a sudden? Because they stab each other in the back, that's why. Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib declined to endorse Kamala Harris at a union rally in Detroit, where the war in Gaza is the top issue for the largest bloc of Arab American voters in the country. Oh okay, I see now. She doesn't think Harris is radical enough. Tlaib, the first Palestinian-American woman to serve in Congress, is the only one of the so-called leftist squad that has not endorsed the Democrat candidate. Wait, why are they saying so-called? She is a leftist squad member. Anyway, quote, don't underestimate the power you all have. More than those ads, those lawn signs, those billboards, you all have more power to turn out people that understand we've got to fight back against corporate greed in our country. Unquote. Yeah, she's sounding, well, not like her typical blabbering self. And I think it's because she doesn't want to state that she is not endorsing Kamala Harris based on the war in the Middle East. She wants Harris to disavow Netanyahu and show full support for Palestine. But Harris isn't that dumb. She won't come out and publicly disavow Israel due to the conflict it would cause with the United States. But look how radical Tlaib is though. She has no problem publicly disavowing Kamala Harris, you see? And isn't this like the ultimate betrayal of women empowerment? Aren't women in the Democratic Party supposed to stick together? Aren't they supposed to fight for women's rights? Aren't you supposed to support another woman of color? Who's running for president of the United States? All that goes out the window if there are radicals who control the Democratic Party. Anywho, let's continue. Tlaib's non-endorsement of Harris comes as a voter survey published on Friday suggested that 43% of Muslim American voters support the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein. After Hillary Clinton's loss to Donald Trump in 2016, Democrats blamed Stein voters for the loss of Michigan and Wisconsin to the Republican candidate. Some Democrats fear that the same scenario could play out again next week. So this is an admission of truth that Democrats can't win an election on their own. Because voters who support Jill Stein shouldn't make a difference if you Democrats have the votes to win elections, right? Also, are they trying to suggest that Tlaib is not endorsing Harris because she knows many people will vote for Jill Stein? So she's not supporting the Democratic presidential candidate? A woman of color at that? This is all they've been talking about throughout this election cycle. This is not the reason. The reason she isn't endorsing Harris is because of the war in Gaza. Tlaib is Palestinian. She wants Harris to spit in Netanyahu's face and fully back Palestine. And Harris isn't dumb enough to commit that political suicide. And due to this, Tlaib spits in Harris's face as she sees that as being disloyal to the progressive movement. Does everyone understand? Let's continue. Earlier this year, during the presidential primary campaigns, about 100,000 Michigan voters marked their ballots as uncommitted as a mark of protest against the Biden-Harris administration's support of Israel's invasion of Gaza. This came after the cross-border Hamas attack in October last year that killed 1,200 people and took more than 200 hostages, mostly civilians. Israel's attack on Gaza has since killed more than 40,000 people, with many of them women and children. In Lebanon, where Israel has now invaded to fight with Iran-backed Hezbollah, more than 2,897 people have been killed and 13,150 wounded. The country's health ministry reports. A quarter of those killed were women and children. The U.S. has been a staunch ally of Israel during the fighting, continuing to send arms to the country and limiting its public criticism of Israeli actions. Okay, now briefly. That war is not fixed with a magic wand. There are terrorists at the center of it. Collateral damage happens in war, especially with terrorism. Because as we all know, terrorists use tactics that create compromising countermeasures from their opponent. So if you have hospitals controlled by terrorists, or schools controlled by terrorists, using children and women as human shields, what does Rashida Tlaib suggest Israel do in such circumstances? Or what about the Palestinian army? Where is the resistance from that military? Well, you had the Palestinian National Security Forces, but it seems they are not mentioned much in this conflict. The predecessor of the NSF is the PLO, or Palestine Liberation Army. And lo and behold, that army has been alleged to have terrorist associations, which Tlaib praised in a pro-Palestine conference. But we're not getting too deep into that, might get our episode taken down. Simply put, Rashida Tlaib, instead of focusing on the terrorist group Hamas, who has military control over Palestine, using her fellow Palestinians as human shields, she focuses on Israel and their actions. It's not a cut and dry war, there are casualties in war, and since you're dealing with terrorism, there will be a lot of innocent lives taken. Unfortunately, you do not negotiate with terrorists. Because if you negotiate, you are giving them more leverage in a war than they initially had. Which only leads to more death. But let's continue. Quote, Tlaib has been critical of the Democratic Party's position on the growing and bloody conflict, saying it was hard not to feel invisible after the party did not include a Palestinian-American speaker at its convention in Chicago in August. In an interview with ZTO, the news organization founded by former MSNBC host and Guardian contributor, Mehdi Hassan, Tlaib said the omission made it clear with their speakers that they value Israeli children more than Palestinian children. Unquote, okay, this is a bunch of garbage. Coming from someone who clearly has no idea what terrorism is all about. Rashida Tlaib has never presented a plan that will end the war between Israel and Palestine. Aren't you a Congress member, who is also Palestinian? Don't you care about the women and children who are slaughtered? I would tend to think she would have some sort of a plan, right? Oh, let me guess, she has no clue of how to deal with terrorism, but is pointing the fingers at everyone who is trying to figure things out. Typical self-righteous progressive, don't have any solution, but is criticizing everyone else for trying to deal with the conundrum of the war against terrorism. Which means, her criticism is not from a place of compassion and honesty. There's a deeper and darker reason she is criticizing Kamala Harris. Rashida Tlaib is associated with Hamas. Yes, and it's the same with Ilhan Omar, who is also associated with Islamic terrorist groups. You see, this is why these individuals went straight to Congress, because they have infiltrated the United States government. What are their credentials? Some bachelor's degree in political science or international studies. Does that mean they are qualified to serve as a United States Congress member? Sure, why not? If Kamala Harris can earn a political science and economics degree, then anybody can just walk into a university and get that piece of paper. The point here is these individuals are not qualified because their so-called credentials, that being their degrees, does not align with how they speak. Such as Kamala Harris, she sounds absolutely dumbfounded discussing the economy, yet has a degree in economics? Something's missing here, and that would be the truth.
The truth is, these degrees are more focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which existed prior to the current trend being implemented. So a Palestinian congresswoman in Tlaib is there to infiltrate the United States government. Ilhan Omar is a Somalian congresswoman who is there to infiltrate the United States government. AOC, who also obtained a DEI bachelor's degree in economics and international relations, is also there to infiltrate the United States government. But you may ask, what is the infiltration for? Well, you have AOC, who is a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, so obviously she's in Congress to destroy the fabric of balance. Then you have Rashida Tlaib, who is also a member of the Democratic Socialist of America. And you have Ilhan Omar, who is not listed as a part of the organization, but is obviously anti-American in her rhetoric. And recently, it is alleged that Somalians in Minnesota have disavowed Kamala Harris also, and endorsed Donald Trump? Really? No, not really. They are only endorsing Trump in spite of Harris, for not disavowing Israel. Now, the reason all of this is important, in relation to Tlaib not endorsing Harris, who is a fellow Democrat, is because these radical progressives crave the ultimate power through congressional legislation and ideology, and they expected Kamala Harris to go further than old Joe and completely go full bonkers. The same way they challenged Pelosi and Schumer, and even called old Joe a Israeli sympathizer, throwing him under the bus. Now they're throwing Kamala Harris under the bus, because she's not radical enough for them in regards to foreign relations. And the timing is so damaging to Harris, as she's in the middle of a presidential election, right? When it matters most, progressives turn their backs on fellow Democrats, because they don't push their wacky agendas far enough. We see it with progressives like Anna Kasparian. All of a sudden she's disavowing the Democratic Party. Oh really? Kamala Harris is not that intuitive politically, perhaps not that smart overall, and she lacks the energy on top of that. So progressives abandon her presidential campaign by not endorsing her, even though they despise Donald Trump? Says a lot, doesn't it? But let's go back to the article. Quote, our trauma and pain feel unseen and ignored by both parties. One party uses our identity as a slur, and the other refuses to hear from us. Where is the shared humanity? Ignoring us won't stop the genocide. Harris has faced continued protests on the trail, as demonstrators call for her to break with President Joe Biden and support an arms embargo on Israel. Harris has said Israel has the right to defend itself, and Palestinians need dignity and security. Confronted by a protester in Wisconsin 2 weeks ago, who accused the Jewish state of genocide, Harris stated, I know what you're speaking of. I want a ceasefire. I want the hostage deal done. I want the war to end. Unquote. Now here's the problem for Harris. If you have Palestinian Americans and non-Palestinian American protesters calling for Harris to break from old Joe, as they claim the United States supports a genocidal war against Palestine, they are willing to distance themselves from not only her presidential campaign, but also from the Democratic Party itself. They'd just be a bunch of radical protesters, not voting for the interest of America. Foreign policy is important, but if that's what you're focusing on, more than issues within the country you live in, then you're just being a political tyrant. Some may disagree with that analysis, but those same people protesting have not provided any solution to the war in the Middle East, just loud and disruptive resistance. In fact, they are components of provoking war as well, because they are using their political voice to persuade a presidential candidate to propose a policy in favor of a foreign nation that has terrorist strongholds within it. And we have to also factor in the Palestinian military has essentially been infiltrated by the terrorist group Hamas as well. Also, you have surrounding terrorist groups such as Hezbollah threatening Israel, flanked on the other side. So warmongers posed as genuine protesters want Harris to disavow Israel, a foreign ally, that would cause a rift between the prime minister of that nation and the president of the United States, which would be Kamala Harris in that scenario. And what do you think would happen? A potential war with Israel, and all hell would break loose across the world. Because you would not only have conflict between the United States and Israel, but terrorist groups would be targeting Israel as well. World War III, right? Now, to be honest, many Palestinians come to the United States for better opportunities. We understand that. But then again, the conflict in Palestine can't be detached from why many flee. And then you have non-Palestinian protesters who are so-called compassionate about the conflict in the Middle East, but have no concern about the issues in the country they reside in. As the saying goes, clean your house up first, before you go inspecting your neighbors for trash. With that being said, the radical protesters want the United States to be entrenched in the war between Israel and Palestine, mainly because they are anti-Israel, not because they are concerned about the Palestinian people. It's like in politics, many will vote for anyone other than Trump, just because they despise him. Pro-Palestine protesters are more focused on scrutinizing Israel than focusing on the terrorist group sitting right in Palestine, fighting for military control of Gaza, seemingly controlling the Palestine military, and using children as human shields. Isn't this a major concern? Apparently not to these protesters. Progressive sounds genuine to a lot of people, as the term in nature means to, well, progress or make progress. But you can progress in proposing anti-American ideology, you can progress in indoctrinating children in schools, you can progress in the plans to depopulate a specific group of people by way of Planned Parenthood. You can progress in raging a war, you can progress in conspiring to undermine a presidential election. Progressives are actually tyrants. It was their influence, though, that persuaded Harris to skip the congressional speech from Netanyahu. But she can't emphatically disavow the prime minister, because guess what? She's running for president. And as the president of the United States, how would it look for Kamala Harris to disavow one of the most important foreign allies to the United States? Of course, it would lead to many global wars. And you see, this is the root of what these individuals want: global war. As we've pointed out, the truth about racism is being protected so much that the global elites will literally start a war to do so. First it was Russia, then it was the Clover virus, now it's the threat of global wars. All to prevent one man from getting reelected, which debunks the claim he's racist. Is there any wonder why Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney are endorsing Kamala Harris? Dick Cheney is a well-known war hawk who made billions off of the Iraq War. Both of them endorse Kamala Harris, which is obviously a sign of orchestrating another major war. Now put this into perspective, they would literally provoke another major war to protect the truth about racism? That is complete madness. Now, you may think racism is not the center of such sinister plans. Well, for one, racism has been historical education taught to civilization across the world, and human beings are conditioned to live their lives according to the perception of the existence of racism. Heck, one can argue that the war in the Middle East is rooted in so-called racism, right? It's the main tactic of divide and conquer. What other divisive tactic is used more than racism? Don't worry, I'll wait.
We will be waiting for eternity. Race and racism is in fact the main divide and conquer tactic, which dictates how people interact by race in society, how people perceive each other by race in society, and ultimately how people vote politically. The previous election was about race, yes, because Trump being re-elected in 2020 would contradict the feverish claims he was the modern Hitler. So to protect this contradiction, a global conspiracy was brought about to distract from the election fraud. Oh yes, China of course didn't want Trump to get re-elected. Democrats definitely didn't want this, so they conspired together. Now this conspiracy is another historical event that was rooted in deception and a conspiracy. The same with racism. Now you have Trump running for president once again, and wars are starting to sprout out. So even if Trump does get elected, which would expose the lies about racism, the nation will more than likely be focused on potential wars around the world. This is bigger than politics. This is about history being exposed. In conclusion, Kamala Harris was used as another anti-Trump candidate. But the key term is used. And once Democrats realized she wasn't capable of convincing the American people, she was a great pick to vote for, they quickly begin to distance themselves, even publicly criticizing her. And this is due to voters seeing through the veil of illusions. Trump will win, but at what cost? This is the chaos sector.